We're going to be talking about the international and domestic news about the South Korean fire. About now 3 days ago, that there was a hospital in the middle of Moraine in South Korea that was on fire. The fire had killed 37 people and injured more than 140 people. And the domestic and international news talked about the story with similarities and differences about it. But first, here's the word cloud for the international news. And then what's here is that this domestic news world cloud. There have been a lot of similarities between the articles. For both the domestic articles, which is specifically CNN and Washington Post, and international news, which was BBC and LaGuardia, they both stated that the fire happened after a similar disaster that happened shortly before this event, which is the violence at Japan and other fire situations like one back in 2014. The articles there also stated that although the 37 people died in the fire, they expected the amount of deaths to increase. And the news also told us which floor that occurred. It specifically started in the first floor and then it went up a couple of floors. And the hospital stated that they would have a sprinkler system installed according to both the international and the domestic news article. And the types of people that are involved in the fire were mentioned, which were specifically elderly people. And the four articles stated that a doctor and a nurse and an assistant died in the fire. And how the domestic news explained the fire in South Korea was not as much as you expect there. Both the CNN and the Washington Post articles weren't exactly 100% specific about the story. They only talked about the basics and important parts of the story rather than everything else involved, like what the victims had to say about the fire after it happened, for example. The articles, however, did explain the way the victims died. Either they were being burned or there were lack of oxygen. And the domestic news was able to explain how bad the fire was, which is two floors out of 6. The international news explained it a lot better here. Both BBC and the Guardian News talked about everything involved in the story 100%, including the victims that the reporters reviewed and having them what they said. And the articles did their best to have readers feel like they're involved in the story, to have us think that we were there, and have us imagine what the whole situation looked like by explaining the details of the event. Just like one of the victims said and what they saw and how bad the fire was when it happened. The difference between the articles that the domestic, like I said, domestic articles talk about the basic, while the international news explained everything. The domestic articles had the exact counts of the ones that died, while the international news had counted the deaths, and then they miscounted because a couple of them were counted twice, and they corrected themselves on the number of deaths. The domestic articles had us learn about the story, while the international articles actually push us inside the story and have us imagine what happened. And the domestic article stated that the sprinkler system could be installed in a hospital due to the size of the building, while the international articles stated that they couldn't because of the laws. One domestic article, CNN, stated that the fire started at 7:20 a.m., while meanwhile the international news, both the articles, stated that the fire started at 7:30 a.m., which is a 10-minute difference. And the domestic news talked about the rules of fire safety and what others can do to prevent a fire from happening again. The international news, unfortunately, doesn't talk about fire safety at all, not even once. The reason they never stated anything about the fire safety is unknown, but the international news were more focused about the event happening rather than everything else. The story really matters because it helped us learn about how cities could be burned and what we can do to stop it. Even if it happened in South Korea and not in the US or wherever we are, we want to make sure that the incident in South Korea doesn't happen here or anything else in the world again. The lessons about fire safety that we learned from the article seem useful, even if one source explained things different from the other. We can't just pick one article on which one is right. We need to take the lessons that we learned from all 4 articles and use them to the best of our ability to keep ourselves and others safe. The story of South Korean fire basically raised awareness to other issues about a fire in certain countries that have or already happened, and make people aware about the situation just enough to prevent a situation like that from happening in their homes or their neighborhoods. To conclude this, we need to follow the lessons that we learned about the hospital fire in South Korea and prevent a similar situation from happening in our home and neighborhood again. We need to have a sprinkler system in every major building or anything to help us survive a fire in order to stop it before it spreads throughout the buildings around us. And we need to make sure that everyone remains safe from the fire. And I basically used the CNN, Washington Post, BBC, and the Guardians as my sources. And that's pretty much it.